All right, thank you so much for tuning in today. It's actually our third interview today. It's the first time I've done three in one day. Uh, so I just appreciate you tuning in. Today we've got an awesome guest. His name's Matthew Weiss, and he's a lawyer turned filmmaker. He's actually produced films in Netflix that you can actually go watch today if you're a Netflix member. But first of all, I just want to say thank you, Matthew, for taking the time to come on today and share with us.
Hey, Jeremy, thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
Awesome. Well, can you give us just a quick spiel about what it is that your platform is about and what is it you're doing?
Sure. So, for the better part of my working life, I was an attorney practicing for myself in Manhattan, New York City. And through the years, we were always doing traffic tickets like speeding tickets, red light tickets, moving violations, and other type of work like real estate and commercial work. But the bread and butter were always these vehicle and traffic law issues that many other lawyers didn't want to handle or didn't know how to handle. And um, having learned from different entrepreneurship speakers and books, uh, the goal I came up with was to own a phrase, a term in my industry. And I figured that I could own the phrase traffic ticket or New York traffic ticket. And so we kind of really focused on that, slowly got rid of doing other types of areas of the law, and just built up a volume practice of traffic tickets. Last year, we did about 6,000 traffic tickets throughout the entire state of New York.
Wow.
And so the beauty is that we don't have to bill hours. We charge flat fees, which for most professionals, not just lawyers, billing hours is the bane of their existence, and minimal account receivables because we get paid up front. And so the model worked very well. Most of the attorneys that work for us, we have 20 to 30 throughout New York State, are 1099. So again, another great model. Any business that can have two-thirds of their workforce as 1099s is kind of cracked the nut and has a really good structure. And so over the years, we built that up, a brand and a following, and just continue to do really good work for people and be honest with them. Even with bad news, we were be candid, and sometimes we even say, "Don't even hire us; it's not worth it." And again, we're looking at it as a long term, trying to provide a public service, answer questions. I answer thousands of questions a month for people, and all for free. And again, just to try to help people. And then, of course, if they need our service, they want someone to actually show up to court. Well, then they have to pass. And so I built that up to a point where I was working really hard and had a successful business, but I also felt like, my business should be for my life. My life should not be my business. And as a result, I said, okay, how do I get myself out of my business so that I can enjoy my life better and have more free time? And so, first, having that vision of that destination was critical because unless you know where you're going, you're never going to get there, right? It's like getting in an Uber and the driver says, "Where are you going?" And I'm like, "I don't know." But of course, if you tell him your destination, he or she can then figure out the route to get there. Well, now I had a destination, this vision. So now it's a question of how to get there, how to get myself out of my business. And so I basically wrote down all my responsibilities, everything that I did for the firm, and I looked at that list and I said, okay, of this list, what things should we no longer be doing? Should we just stop doing, period? And I like to call that abdicate. What should we abdicate doing? And so, for instance, real estate closings, while they were good fees and we had a steady amount of those kind of work, that kind of work coming in, we realized that it was not our core business. It was not that phrase or term that we were trying to own. And often they get rescheduled. There's a CO or certificate of occupancy needed for a screened-in porch or an extension, and then it just delays things, and it just it was good on the face of the money, but it just was slowing up, gunking up the system, kind of putting glue in the cogs. And
Yeah.
so we started got rid of those type of law, that area that wasn't our specialty, and just kind of knew what we owned. And so that shortened our list. Then from there, I looked at the list. I said, okay, now what can we set up that humans, myself in particular, don't need to touch anymore? And so I call that automate. What could we set up that would automate the process? So for instance, if you went to our traffic ticket website, which is nytrafficticket.com, and you entered a contact us form, there would be a drop down screen for where your case is located. Let's say, for example, Brooklyn. And then there'll be a second drop down for the type of offense you had. So let's say it's a disobey a stop sign ticket. And then you would enter in your information as to what your question is or what help you needed. Well, I automated that so that within seconds you get a response, which in the subject line will say Brooklyn stop sign ticket. So it looks to be custom and the response is custom. And so that was something that I was spending a lot of time with, is quickly answering leads that were interested in our service. And now I've automated it, but not only automated, but in a way that was customized, that it appeared to be done by a human being, and really saved up and freed up a lot of my time.
So you've you built this business up, and you had 20, 30 employees. You're handling the traffic tickets, and you were able to systemize it, automate it, and minimize it down to having it support your income for having a lifestyle, to then be able to move on to something you're more passionate about. Is sort of
So remember, they weren't employees; they're 1099
okay,
for the
1099s.
lawyers. So right now we have about 20 or 30 throughout the state. That's a big difference, right? There's no unemployment benefits. There aren't any. If one doesn't do well, I could always switch out very easily, as opposed to employee, where there's more entanglements to extricate yourself from a relationship as an employer-employee. So that's one distinction that's critical. But two, I was really focusing on my role in the company, freeing up my time as the leader and owner, and how could I free that up? And as you'll see, that's going to be a big part of how I was able to transform myself to a filmmaker. So we automated, for example, this email, which if anyone's interested in the trick behind that, it's using Google Gmail, the filters that they provide, along with canned responses. So the combination of those two allowed us to provide customized responses. And so now that freed up more of my time. And now I looked at the list and I said, okay, I can't automate the rest. I need to continue to do or perform that. So we can't abdicate the rest. So what should we give someone else to do that's on my list? And I like to call that delegate. So my formula was abdicate, automate, and then delegate. And so one of the big things that I did was handle the new leads that came in. I would sell to them. And I felt in my heart, like most entrepreneurs, that no one could close more leads and explain the process in our service better than me. And so anyone that would try to do it would not be as good as me. But I had a light bulb moment, which was 80% of me is better than 100% of me. And what I mean by that is, if someone else is really good at it, 80% of me, but maybe not as good as me, and they're doing the work, then that just frees up my time to do something else. And while I might lose some business, I'm gaining a lot of time. And so it's very hard for many entrepreneurs to give up that part of the business, the sales part. And for me, it was a successful formula, because as a result, I ended up finding myself working anywhere from 15 to 30 minutes a day, as opposed to 4 to 8 hours a day. And now I had free time to pursue things that I was passionate about, that I thought was worthwhile, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think that's a long journey to, but like very well explained, because it's like, what can you get rid of? What can you systemize and automate? And then what is it that's left on your plate that you can then delegate out? And then you just have your little piece that's left, so that you have all that free time.
Exactly right. And so for most entrepreneurs, they find themselves, they own the business, but they really just own a job. And I wanted the business to serve my life. And the only way would be is if I could get myself out of the business. And so that would free me up to do things that I found more productive, or something I had more passion about. And so along the way, I started using a new bank for my law firm. And the representative of the bank, my personal rep, was named Jeff Crowther. And he invited me to lunch, just to thank me for using his company and bank. And we went to lunch, and it was very pleasant. And then at some point, he started talking about his son, Wells, who happened to pass away on 9/11. And he told me the story about his son, and I was just blown away. I literally, in my head, said three things in quick succession. What an amazing story. Everyone needs to hear this story. I want to share this story with everyone. Now, keep in mind, I never took a class in filmmaking. I never read a book on filmmaking. In fact, I had no bucket list item to be involved with filmmaking, but I was gripped by this story, and I passionately wanted to share it. And along the way, I obtained permission from the family, Jeff and his wife, to make a documentary about their son, Wells Crowther. And um, that's like kind of the genesis of how I became a filmmaker from that lunch, totally unexpectedly. But I guess
Yeah.
the key thing is that I was in a position to take advantage of the opportunity to make this film about this incredible hero, because I had set up my life in a way that I had freed myself up.
Yeah, that's awesome. So you had this conversation, you got this really powerful story from talking to your new baker friend. Uh, why is it so important? Like, why did you feel like this is an obligation for you to share the story? Like,
Sure.
like why was it so important to you?
Yeah. So I just was incredibly gripped by the fact that Wells, who perished on 9/11, was so selfless, courageous, and the way that his story unfolds is just incredible. And in this world, my feeling is there's not enough of people thinking about others and a lot of people thinking about themselves. And I felt if people saw this film and saw what Wells did, it would incentivize them to think a little less about themselves and a little bit more about others. I know for me, Wells is a model and someone who every day impacts me and helps me be more involved with my community, more involved with giving. And so the goal was to share Wells' story so that people would be encouraged to basically be better people.
That's awesome. So then, why was it so important to you to help incentivize and inspire people to think more about others and to be better people?
Well, I think that if everyone just does a little bit more for others, the result would be exponential in terms of making us a friendlier, better planet, a better place to live. So Wells worked on the 104th floor of the South Tower as an equity trader, and he was in the building, the South Tower, when it got hit. The South Tower got hit second on 9/11, but came down first about 56 minutes after it was struck. And he called his mom and said, "I'm okay." It went into voicemail, so she got it later, and he never made it out. They were obviously utterly devastated to lose this incredible young man. He was 24 years old, their only son, and uh, they had no idea what happened to him other that he didn't make it out. And after a week to 10 days, they realized that they need to have some type of acknowledgement of his loss. So they had a memorial service. And um, Alison Crowther, Wells's mother, um, she was possessed and obsessed with learning and looking for Wells, reading documentaries, newspaper articles, watching news reports, anything that she could find. And even though she knew it was irrational, which was her own words, she felt that she needed to keep looking and find out anything she could about her son and um, see if there was anything out there for her. And that persisted for 8 months. And then May of 2002, so 8 months following 9/11, the New York Times did a very lengthy article. 5 different journalists contributed to provide hour by hour, minute by minute accounts about what happened in both towers, uh, pretty much from survivors that were in or near the building, and what they saw and how they got out. And Allison got a hold of this article, and in there she read about 2 women who both said that they were saved, led up and out by a man who had a red bandana over his face. As soon as she read that, she's like, they're talking about Wells. They're talking about my son, because Wells always had a red bandana with him from the age of 8. It was a habit he got into because his dad had a blue one, and he loved his dad and wanted to emulate a habit that his dad had. So they gave him one, and he had it with him when he played hockey. He was a captain of the hockey team in high school, and he played lacrosse in high school. Then he went to Boston College. That's why I have this the BC with their bandana font. BC honors him and recognizes him. This was a shirt they gave out for.
I see the bandana in the background as well.
Yeah, yeah, and so uh, you know, she had to assure herself that this was actually the person that saved them. So she sent photos to both the women, Ling Young and Judy Ween, who who looked at the photograph of Wells and positively ID'd him as the man that saved them both. And then a few months later, they both came to the Crowther home for a barbecue. And through the New York Times article and their accounts, the Crowthers were able to piece together 8 months later the last hour of their son's life, his finest hour by all accounts. And so they learned that he came down from 104 down to 78, which is where United Airlines flight 11 had struck. And you got to imagine this was a plane crash a mile in the sky, right, for 56 minutes before the towers came down. So jet fuel, fires, debris, smoke, hellish conditions. And Wells came down into this. He put on his bandana to protect him from the unclean air, and he went to work. And he extricated people that were trapped. He led people to the only working stairwell that he could find. He used a fire extinguisher to put out a few fires along the way. And he led that group that was on the 70th floor all the way down to 61, carrying a unconscious woman on his shoulder. He led them there, guided them to where they needed to continue down, and he went back up a second time. From there, he got another group and led them down about 5 flights, sent them on their way, and went back up again to get even a few more people out. At least in my research, we've determined that he saved at least 10 people that day. Ling Young and Judy Ween, who we know from the New York Times article, but 8 others. And there could be more, but we know there was at least 8 that were saved, 10 that was saved that day by Wells. And I was just blown away by how a bandana, a piece of fabric, could literally allow this family to learn what their son did that day, learned in Alison's own words that he had free will. He wasn't trapped. He made a conscious decision to help people. He could have got out, but he decided he was going to help people going up and down stairwells and doing what he did. And that gave her some ease. Obviously, it didn't take away her pain. They cry for him every day, still to this day. But it allowed them to have a shift in their perspective on their loss, among other things, which I thought was just incredible that this piece of fabric could result in such a massive shift in their perspective.
Yeah, that's amazing.
So from there, Wells ended up in the lobby of the South Tower, and one of his friends in the movie, when you get to see it, Man in Red Bandana, remarked, "I was mad at him. He was just within feet of getting out, and he didn't get out. Why, Wells? Why didn't you get out?" And it turns out he didn't get out because he was with a group of firefighters and a Jaws of Life. And they realized and found out that that group was going up to 78, where Wells had just left, to help other people and use that Jaws of Life to extricate people that were trapped. And so Wells was not trying to get out. He didn't get killed when the building collapsed because he was exiting. He got killed because he was going back up yet to help more people. And it's just an incredible story of courage, of selflessness, of giving. And I just thought the values that he displayed and personifies of a real hero, not a super Marvel hero like we see so many movies that come out, but a real hero was something that the world needed to see.
Yeah, that's amazing. So you heard the story and it really touched you. You got the takeaways of courage and giving, so you felt that you could really spread the message and help bring positivity just to the world in a massive way through creating this film.
Well, I would say Wells spread the message. I was just a conduit for him.
Okay, sure.
His story is so powerful and incredible that it hides how bad I am as a filmmaker. And I like to say that if you're going to make your first film or write your first book or whatever endeavor you do, there's a learning curve. So start with really good material. Start with the best clay you can if you're going to make a sculpture, right? So that you have that. And in my case, I was fortunate that I was uh, in a position to have this incredible story. And I would add that if Wells's heroics had come out a week or two or three following 9/11, I think the story would have been more widely known. Now, it is known by many people, but not nearly as many as if it had come out within a few weeks of the disaster. But because of the time lag of 8 months, by then the 9/11 news and stories had kind of waned. And as a result, it didn't get the, I would say, attention that it deserved. And again, that was kind of lucky for me because now I have this incredible story that I could, make a movie about.
Right. And I find it really interesting how you created all this excess time, and you didn't really have any interest or thought about doing filmmaking until you heard the story, and then you just filled that gap of all this empty time with let's make a film about this powerful story. And I
Yes.
think that's an
So the
interesting
lesson is
way.
right. So the lesson is put yourself in a position that you can take advantage of opportunities as they arise, because you never know when a good opportunity can arise. If I was still in my business doing it every day, I would have never been able to have made this film. Now, keep in mind the Crowthers, they have been through so much heartache and cried and shed so many tears that for me, a first time filmmaker, this was a weighty responsibility. This was not something that I could take very lightly. The last thing I wanted to do was to make a film that they were disappointed in or somehow gave them more any negativity whatsoever. Uh, I felt like I had to leave no stone unturned, no corner cut. I did not have a budget for the film. I funded it myself. Um, Most documentaries, if they break even, are a huge success. So how could I ask anyone else to fund something that likely is to lose money? So I just did it myself. And I didn't have a budget. I couldn't say, all right, we're going to have 6 computer animations of what it was like inside the stairwell of the tower, because if I had needed 8, well, then I needed 8, right? I had to get it right for Wells and his family. And so there was no cutting corners. It was just doing it and getting it the best I could. And it took me 6 years to complete the project.
Wow.
6 years. And in part because I was still learning what to do. I had a lot of learning curves. Just finding an editor, literally, the project sat on hold for 6 to 8 months till I found an editor that met all the requirements that I had for that role. And, I guess now I could make a film quicker because I now have those connections that I didn't have. But the funny thing is, in the process, you get upset. I wish I could get this done. Or you're frustrated. I can't. You interview an editor, doesn't work out, and you're back to the drawing board, and you can get distracted or disappointed. But in my case, it turned out to be a blessing in disguise for reasons unrelated to anything I was ever thinking about. Apologies. So what happened was President Obama in May of 2014 talked at the opening of the 9/11 Museum. And as a result, um, he spoke for about 6 minutes, and about 3 of those minutes, he talked about Wells. And it added a tremendous amount of gravitas to my trailer and the opening and the ending of my film to have the President of the United States talking about Wells. And it really grabs your attention. I'm sure if you watch within the first few minutes and you see the President of the United States talking about Wells, you're like, this is someone important. This is something I need to see. It adds this gravitas that I wouldn't have had if I had finished the movie in 2 or 3 years, like if I had that
Right.
experience. So, I guess the lesson is sometimes you get news, a good thing, bad thing, and sometimes you just don't know, is it a good thing or a bad thing,
Yeah, I mean, the fact that it's taking so long, you were probably thinking it's a bad thing, and now you've got this clip that you can add in that makes it that much more powerful.
Tremendous. Yeah. Even the
Yeah.
trailer, you can watch it online. Same thing. It just grabs your attention. The film is now, you mentioned Netflix, but it's currently actually on Amazon.com, is the place that people can watch it if they're interested. And so, along the way, I felt like I needed to get an A-lister, someone who would grab people's attention when I saw that they were the narrator of the film. And in my mind, I thought of like Robert De Niro, who's a well-known New York personality, um, and Alec Baldwin, and um, I just worked my network and I just talked to as many people as possible. And I like to say, we all have obstacles, we all have challenges, we all would have things that we want to accomplish or do or see. And my recommendation is just tell everybody. Don't keep it a secret inside. Just tell the world, because you never know who's going to help you. And so, literally, I must have had 150 to 200 conversations with different people about, do you know any A-listers, who would narrate my film? Who would be good? Who do you know? And along the way, a labor lawyer, a fellow lawyer friend of mine, said, speak to my buddy. He's a PR guy, and he represents Alec Baldwin. And so that was perfect, right? And so I had a call with him and I spoke to him about the story, and his role is to help the image or brand of his clients. So being associated with this heroic story certainly is good for people's brand. So he thought it was great for Alec, and he said, I'll also show it to Gwyneth. And I'm like, that's great. And I hung up the phone, and I assumed he meant Gwyneth Paltrow, because I don't know any other Gwyneths that, A-list Gwyneths. And it turned out it was Gwyneth Paltrow. And as soon as I hung up the phone, I said, Matt, you're such an idiot. Why were you looking for a male voice? You need a female voice for the narration, because one, it's a male-dominated story, right? With Wells and his father, fireman. It's very harsh and difficult at points, because you're going through this tragedy and the thousands that died. And a woman's voice provided, in my mind, would provide some balance and softness to a very difficult topic. And so I was very quickly rooting for Gwyneth to be yes and Alec to be a no, which it happened to be. Gwyneth read the script. And when I saw her and asked her why she ended up doing this, because she's never narrated a documentary before, she said, I thought your script was awesome, which made me feel really good because I wrote it.
Right.
And so, like me, she was gripped by the story, and for no charge, no points, just pure altruistically decided that she wanted to narrate this. And she went out to Santa Monica and spent a few hours with her getting it down on the track. And I think when you watch it, you'll see she did a great job, not trying to overselling anything, just very, conservative, modulated. And this, you don't need to sell the story. The story is so good, you don't need to dramatize it or overact it. And I think she did a great job, amazing job for the narration, to kind of bridge the gap and kind of tell the story, the vision that I had for Wells.
Yeah, that's amazing. So,
Yeah,
so thinking to
imagine Matt Weiss directed Gwyneth Paltrow.
yeah,
Let me say it differently. A New York traffic lawyer with no filmmaking experience whatsoever directed an Oscar-winning actress. I mean, it's insane. Like, people would pay big money if that was available on a website to bid on, or at an auction. People would bid big money for her to narrate their documentary. And I am fortunate, and I feel like when you get yourself involved, when you give, opportunities and experiences arise for you or present themselves to you. And making this film, that was just one of many incredible experiences that I was given and had. And you don't get these things unless you give. If you give, people want to reciprocate. They see the kind of person you are. And literally, we had people helping with this film for free in all different types of ways. One part of the film that I'm particularly proud of is the last 15 minutes, where you learn about Wells's legacy, how he's remembered all over the country. And then we share this incredible secret that I won't spoil, that is just a beautiful poetic ending, and it's all true. But Wells's story had been told by different news outlets, NBC, CNN, among others. And so my goal was to advance the story, not just rehash a story that had already been told, but add to it with research and really digging deep and making this the most comprehensive, the ultimate version of Wells Crowther's story that I could do. And again, that harkens back to what I mentioned earlier about making sure the Crowthers loved the film. That was my goal. And the only way I felt I could accomplish that would be by, digging in and getting additional information and research. So the last 15 minutes discusses Wells' his legacy, how he's remembered, not just by friends and families and where he went to college, Boston College, but also total strangers. There are artwork in his honor throughout the country, murals and whatnot. There's songs that have been written about him. There are babies all over the country. I know you're in Atlanta area. There's a baby from Woodstock, Georgia, and Dallas, Georgia, that are named after Wells that live in your home state. So he's remembered throughout the country in so many different ways. And for parents to say, I want my child to be named after Wells so that they grow up and know about Wells and kind of hopefully personify his values is incredibly touching. And then, of course, you hear from President Obama and how he remembers him. So this last 15 minutes, the legacy of Wells is incredibly uplifting and inspiring. And I think it's rare for a film that is so sad at points, that really brings you down. You come in here, but then, of course, as you hear about the tragedy and you hear about the death and you hear that Wells died and from his family and the service and the funeral, you can't help but get choked up and sad. And yet then you find out what he did that day and his heroics that day and how it became revealed. And then you hear how he's remembered and honored. And then finally, I share this incredible secret about him. You leave the theater or your couch feeling better than when you first started watching the film. And I think for a film that brings you so far down to lift you so far up, it's a rarity. And I challenge audiences. I do a lot of public speaking about legacy and making a mark. And I've challenged audiences all over the country, all over the world. And not a single person has told me a similar movie that has that incredible arc.
Nice. Yeah, that's awesome. So starting out the when you're creating or coming up with the idea to create this film, for the Crowthers, did you ever encounter like imposter syndrome or, like what kind of barriers did you run into because you were never a filmmaker before this? You never even really considered being a filmmaker.
Sure. So I think it starts out with commitment, and the only way to be committed to something is by start telling people. So I went home, I told my wife, I said, I'm making a movie. She did a double take. I told her what it was about and why. And fortunately, I have an incredibly supportive wife who joins me when I go to fight windmills. And telling friends, strangers, family, the more people you commit to that you're going to do something, the more likely you're going to do it. And I started out with just the research. I found old news clips about Wells and articles about him, and I organized them, and then read the 9/11 Commission report, and I just started researching and then drafting an outline. And it's funny because as an attorney, having practiced law for all these years, I felt entirely comfortable with the research and writing. It's something I've been doing for clients uh, my whole life, in a different context. But that part of it was at home. I felt at home. I felt like they were very natural to me. And then from there, I needed help. I needed to get a crew with the lights and the cameras, and that I outsourced. So while I didn't know how to use the equipment technically, obviously we all knew we wanted good sound, good lights. I did know how to vet and hire because I've done that as a business owner. So I've used those skills, top grading skills, among others. And as an attorney, I've done plenty of depositions, asking questions questions under oath of people. And so I did all the interviews and, got the information that I needed out of them. And then we had about 300 to 400 hours of film. And I thought naively, once I have my editor, I'll just show him the script, show him the outline, and he'll make it. And basically, I had to sit with the editor for about 75% of the editing. And literally, him and I together pounded it out. And, just to create my vision, while he was technically great with the software, to get my vision on the four corners of the screen is something that only I could have done. And so I had to get that time and put it in, and it's very tedious. I could spend 6 hours and we would get a really good 38 seconds, and I would leave.
Yeah.
I got it. That was great. That was 38 seconds are terrific. Just what I want. And you just have to be persistent and plow away because, a lot of people start projects and they never finish them. And it's interesting, for me, I have such passion about sharing Wells's story that passion pushed me through any of that boredom, the tedium. And in fact, I'm as passionate now about sharing Wells's story as I was when I first started the film. So I found the right project for myself, at least.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the most important thing is to really deep dive and find a powerful why. Because if you have enough powerful enough why, you're going to overcome the challenges that get in your way, and you're going to be able to power through those. And I really liked what you said about tell other people about what you're doing, because you're enrolling others to hold you accountable through that whole journey. So if you are saying I'm going to make a film, you start talking to everyone. I need this, I need to meet this person, and you're just out there talking and meeting people, and then basically doing affirmations on a regular basis and enrolling others in those affirmations. You sort of just made it come to fruition just by
Sure. And I
speaking it.
actually did a TEDx talk at Boston College on what is courage, because everyone knows it when they see it, but I had never seen it broken down to its elements. And the first element is commitment, pretty much what I described to you earlier. But beyond that, it involves taking a risk, right? Or overcoming a fear. Because if there's no risk, if there's no fear element, then it's never going to be considered courageous. And then, of course, giving your maximum effort. Those were the three elements that I came up with and did a TEDx on. And I felt the first one, the commitment one, is kind of the starting point for that whole process of being brave.
So for people that are considering making films that end up on Netflix or Amazon, what is, if you don't mind sharing, yeah, what is it? What does like the income world look like for that space?
It's very tough, very competitive. In fact, now with the coronavirus, what you're finding is studios are now releasing their films direct to video on demand, films that would ordinarily be in theaters for a certain amount of time. And then there will be, let's say, a 90-day window before they will be available on video on demand. Now they're just releasing them right on video on demand. And for years, they've been trying to get rid of the theater window where it's theater only exclusivity. And I think as a result, you're probably going to see that, which just makes it even harder for movie makers. But the studios are driving this because they have these films and they want to generate revenue, and they know people are home looking for stuff. So you're probably going to see this virus change how movie theaters uh, have their films and how they're released. And it's very inexpensive to buy a camera that's of quality. For $3,500, you could have a camera and make content. So there's a lot of content out there. So I would say if you're interested in sharing stories, make sure you're really passionate about it. Make sure you're doing it because you want people to hear the story, not because you're making money. Maybe you will, maybe you won't, but really do it because you think you're doing something of value that you are doing beyond just making money, something like a message or teaching something educational, whatever it might be. That would be my, number one thing. And make sure you're passionate about it. There are a lot of things that are very interesting that people can learn about or be inspired by. But if you're not passionate about it, then you're likely probably not going to finish it, or not likely to do as well a job as you would if you just are all in, to take a poker expression.
Right. So the number one, most powerful piece of advice is just to have that clear why and find the passion that's going to really drive you through anything. Because you didn't know you wanted to make a film, it wasn't in the pipeline for what you're doing, but you found a piece of passion that drove you in that direction, and you just figured it out because you're willing to fight through anything that was in your way.
Exactly right. And that's in large part because I'm a giving person. I look to help people first. And Wells' story is kind of the ultimate of giving, right? There's no greater gift that someone can give but their own life to save someone else. So that really resonated with me and my why.
Well, do you have any stories that come to mind from people that have been impacted from the film that you put together? Like anybody
Oh,
that's come to you? Do you
so
mind
so
sharing?
many.
Do you
Yeah, there's a
mind
lot of
picking one?
great stories. I'll start with the Crowthers. So Jeff and Allison, they obviously knew about Ling Young and Judy Ween from the New York Times article, but in my research, I found identified other people that Wells saved that day that they didn't even know about. And so one of them is Ed Nichols, who interviewed for the film, and he found out that they were going to be at one of the film screenings in Connecticut. So he made his way up there because he wanted to meet them and thank them for raising this incredible hero. And for me to be able to be part of putting them together and allow them to meet and talk to one another was incredibly, incredibly rewarding. Another incredible story was involved Harry Wanamaker. So Harry Wanamaker is a firefighter in Wells's hometown, and Wells actually in high school was a volunteer junior firefighter. And he actually did see live fires, at the age of 17, 18 before he went off to college. And so Harry was his kind of mentor, mentee relationship, and then was a family friend. And after the disaster, Harry was on the pile for weeks and weeks and weeks working to recover remains. And there's only one picture of Harry and Wells together. And it happens to be one day where they were on a fireboat. And Wells had told his dad, when you take the picture, get the trade center in the background. I want a picture where I work. And so there's a picture of Harry, Wells, and the trade center. Now, that photo has been used in numerous newspaper accounts and TV accounts because it's Wells with the Trade Center. And so when we had our premiere, Harry's family was there, and we talked about Harry because Harry died from his illness 9 years following 9/11. And so even though their date of deaths were 9 years apart, they both died from the same reason, the 9/11 disaster. So Harry's story kind of allowed me to talk about all the first responders that cleaned up, the heroes that cleaned up this disaster, 99.9% of which all have some type of respiratory illness, if not worse. Over 150 have died already, and Harry was among those. So we talked about Harry's story, almost like a sub story in the film. And his daughter came up to me in tears after the film, and she's like, Matt, I've seen that photo on so many news accounts where they talked about Wells, and until I saw your film, no one ever said my dad's name or talked about my dad. And for her to say that to me was incredibly touching. I didn't even think of it. I just felt like, this is part of the disaster. Harry's story was related to Wells in many ways. And again, that was this incredible connection that I was able to put together, and feeling for her and preserving his story as well as part of the process.
That's amazing. Yeah, I'm sure there's endless stories of people that film's touched that you could share.
Yeah, letters, emails. There's still babies being named after Wells that we find out about. I just got a message from a firehouse in north of Dallas that has a 9/11 exhibit with mural, including Wells, exhibit for Wells. And they asked if I had anything. So I sent them a film poster and a bandana like I have behind me to the right here. And I said to add that to your tribute. But yeah, he's remembered and continues to be remembered, and hopefully a model for people to emulate, for years to come.
Yeah. Well, I know we're running short on time here. Before I open the floor for you to talk a little bit more about how people can engage with you, and I'll make sure to put links to everything on the website. Knowing that a lot of listeners here are people that are maybe struggling to share their voice or find their why to really have something powerful enough to push through. Do you have any last words for our listeners today?
Yeah. So I think you're doing the right thing by looking for your why and your purpose. Um, I've studied positive psychology, which is a branch of psychology, relatively new, which is one which says that people that are healthy mentally, how can they be healthier, right? We typically look at mental health for people that have depression or anxiety or some other type of mental illness, but there are many people that are just average people that are healthy, but we can make them happier. And so positive psychology talks about different principles to make you happier. And one of which is being involved with something bigger than you, having a higher purpose. And so certainly most people have a happiness from major events like being involved with going to a friend's wedding, a bachelor party, a big going to a concert, great high moments. And then there's the happiness we get from certain flow activities, whether it's painting, doing a crossword puzzle, maybe it's reading, whatever habits or hobbies you enjoy. That's a second type of happiness, which most people will get to. But the third type of happiness, which is purpose happiness, which is in being involved with something bigger than you that may outlive you, actually gives you happiness. So the goal is to keep all three of those buckets filled up, not overfilled and not underfilled, but filled up to the right amount. So by you pursuing purpose happiness, I can guarantee you the rock star fun happiness and the flow happiness will come. But by pursuing your purpose happiness, you will be a happier person by doing things, whether you are involved with the PTA, church, whatever it is, writing a book, run for office. There's so many things that you can do that have this higher value, this sense of giving back and being involved with something bigger than you. I can tell you, I would write to a total stranger in Kentucky saying, "Hey, I heard your son is named after Wells and I'm making this movie. Can you send me a high resolution photo of your son or daughter? And can you sign this 2-page legal document? And by the way, I have no money to give you. I just need to use this for my film." 99% of the people that asked for help, they said yes, because the people with which Wells' story resonated were people that were giving, that were selfless, Gwyneth Paltrow among others. And so um, it allowed me to kind of work with that mindset and with that community. So my advice would be to continue being involved with higher purpose, things that will outlive you, that are bigger than you. And I guarantee you won't regret it, and it'll make you a happier person.
Awesome. That's huge advice. And I think that, the more I talk with people and drill into their whys, it's helping me, figure out more of my why as I'm evolving my journey. So like I've been seeing myself trend more towards, a lot of what you're talking about here.
I love that. That's awesome.
Well, Matthew, before I let you go, you want to talk about where the best way someone can, contact you and,
Sure.
where they can find your content. And I'll make sure
Yeah.
to put links on the winefluence.com website for the show notes.
Absolutely, Jeremy. Thank you. I appreciate you having me. I hope you and your viewers enjoy my journey and more importantly, Wells's journey. My website is matthewweiss.com. I use that from public speaking engagements and as links to other things that I'm involved with. And then, of course, I would recommend you go to Amazon.com to see Man in Red Bandana, my first film. We didn't even get into it, but from making my first film, I'd now produced a second film called Vault, which is also on Amazon, about a heist from a vault that happened in 1975 when $30 million was stolen. And now I'm starting to film. Well, we were starting in May, but now it's probably in the fall, another film, and I'm writing 3 other films. So I've embraced filmmaking and the benefits of being involved with something bigger than me and having this leveraged efforts. As an attorney, I work on a case between a plaintiff and a defendant. Only 2 or 3 people care about it. But when I'm involved with a film, literally thousands of people get impacted by it. And so I find it extremely rewarding. And I hope you get to see my film, and I hope your viewers get to watch it. If you do, let the credits run, because after about 2 minutes, I do a Q&A with the family, the mom and dad, Wells's parents, and we do a little bit backstory as well.
That's huge. Well, Matthew, I appreciate you coming on today. I definitely would love to have you on as a guest in the future as your journey evolves. And I appreciate you being so vulnerable with us today and sharing your why and talking so deeply about your mission and stuff.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and actually, before I let you go, I always like to ask for feedback because I'm always trying to self-develop and improve how I'm doing things here. So I'm just wondering if you have any feedback on the podcast or what you think about it.
I think you asked the right questions. I think you did a great job letting me talk, right, and not interrupting. I think that was great. I like your purpose focus. I'm a big fan of Simon Sinek, and actually helped when he wrote his book. I have the galley right over here, actually, of his book. I read it and gave him a little feedback. He is kind of my model about purpose and leading with why. And my law firm our goal is to make your legal problem as simple and easy as possible. So we have a why for that. You know, and I'm a big believer in it. So I love your focus, and I think it's you know, you're on the right track. I love it.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much. I really appreciate you coming on today and for your feedback as well. Thanks.
My pleasure. Thanks, and let me know where you'll have this so I can promote it on my social media as well.
Yeah. This is actually available. I mean, it sometimes takes 10 to 15 minutes to get uploaded because it's live streamed, but it's immediately available on YouTube. And then it takes me about a week or so to get it onto my website where I'll have the show notes and have it on the podcast and stuff.
That's awesome. I really appreciate you having me, and I hope it was a good show for you as well.
Yeah, it's